In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing my Scorching Slayer build, which is a level 100 strength-based build that uses a twin blade and fire effects. For those of you out there that thought Moonveil was busted, wait till you see this build in action. It absolutely stance breaks enemies so frequently, it's absolutely absurd. So first up, let's talk about what weapon I chose and why. I chose the Gargoyle's Twinblade for this build, and there are a couple reasons for that. The first reason is that because when you go to attack an enemy that you've stance broken, particularly bosses in this case, because you probably just critically strike regular enemies, you want to be able to attack very, very quickly in order to hit them for as much damage, particularly if you're trying to set a status effect on them so that you can get it to build up quickly. Twin Blades are very, very good at this because they attack very rapidly, so Twin Blade was a natural pick for that style of play. Secondly, the Gargoyle's Twin Blade has A scaling when you set the heavy affinity on it, and since Flame of the Redmanes only scales in damage off weapon and strength, this was a must. If you're going to be using Flame of the Redmanes as an ability, you need to pick a weapon that scales predominantly off strength, because each point into strength is going to increase the damage of Flame of the Redmanes. It also has pretty low requirements, being 18 strength and 15 dexterity. We're obviously going to be cranking strength, though that's not a problem, but 15 dexterity is rather low, so we don't have to meet very high dexterity requirements in order to use this weapon. Now, you could really use any weapon you want for this build. Flame of the Redmanes is slottable on any weapon type, so whatever you want to use is completely up to you, and you can change this into something else. But I just found this was perfect for my playstyle, but there are other weapons, and I tried other weapons as well that had like S scaling and strength, and that did not seem to matter or factor in at all into Flame of the Redmanes damage. So if you're thinking, oh, I'll take an S scaling strength weapon and get more damage out of Flame of the Redmanes, that is just not the case. However, you may get more damage out of your strength. The other weapon that I use for this build is the Clawmark Seal. You can actually use any seal you want for this build. There are probably other better ones. The reason I chose it is because I have predominantly strength, which this seal scales off strength and faith. But most of the buffs we use for this build don't actually increase, the only one there being lightning armament, and that scales predominantly off faith. So if you want to boost your lightning armament damage, you'll actually use a seal that has like S scaling in faith. But it's not going to be that much higher because at this point of the build, we only have 15 faith anyway. So it's not a huge deal which seal you use, and you really don't need to upgrade it that much. As far as armor goes, you really want to use any that allows you to mid-roll the heaviest you can get away with for maximum protection. There aren't really any unique pieces that are a must-have for this build. When it comes to talismans for this build, I used the Fire Scorpion Charm, Winged Sword Insignia, Assassin's Cerulean Dagger, and Green Turtle Talisman. The Fire Scorpion Charm is there to increase your fire damage. If you're using the fire setup for scaling or fire affinity for this build, this will increase your damage even more. But obviously it's going to increase your Flame of the Redmanes cast, and when you buff your weapon with Bloodflame Blade, it will also increase the damage there. Winged Sword Insignia is there because you will hit multiple times while using a Twin Blade, and they attack very, very rapidly, particularly when bosses are staggered. So this is going to increase your attack power very, very quickly. The Assassin's Cerulean Dagger is there to regain FP when you critically strike enemies around the map. This is going to be regular enemies. You're not going to do this on bosses very much. The weapon skill only costs 14 FP, so if you critically strike something after using it, you will actually net +1 FP. So you'll actually regain FP by doing this, which is why I slotted it here. Originally, I had slotted Carrion Filigree Crest in order to be able to cast this more often at a lower cost, but because it's kind of a weird number at 14, it only went down to 11, which is not as much as I was hoping. So I feel like Assassin's Cerulean Dagger is the better play here. As you progress this build closer to 150, you'll probably dump this one and replace it with Alexander's Shard in order to increase the damage of Flame of the Redmanes. And lastly, we have Green Turtle Talisman in order to regain stamina faster. As enemies drop down when you stagger them, particularly bosses, you're going to want to regain your stamina while you're moving up to them so that you can go to town with your Twin Blade combo. The way this build works generally as you're moving around the landscape is that you buff with Bloodflame Blade all the time. You want to keep this buff 100% of the time in order to add fire damage to your build, and also to be able to set bleeding on enemies. I find that even though this weapon doesn't have bleeding on it intrinsically, so it doesn't make as good use of Bloodflame Blade as some other builds, because Twin Blades attack so rapidly, you're still able to set this status effect with ease. Additionally, one of the things that's really cool about this build is that while your weapon is buffed with Bloodflame Blade, if you use Flame of the Redmanes, it will actually add Bloodflame to it, so it will keep enemies building up their bleed bar, and you can actually set the hemorrhage status effect if you hit something enough times in a row with Flame of the Redmanes while your weapon is buffed, although that's unlikely since you'll probably just kill it outright with damage before that ever happens. Still, this is a really good thing to know because a lot of times when you go into boss fights, you'll hit a boss with, 2 or 3 times with Flame of the Redmanes before you begin attacking them with your Twin Blades, and all that time you're actually building up their bleed bar before you even start attacking. You're going to buff with Flame Grant Me Strength when you're facing a tough enemy or a boss, and what's really great about this is it buffs both your physical and fire damage, and your weapon, when it's buffed with Blood Flame Blade, will do physical and fire damage, so it gets kind of buffed on both sides of that. And Flame of the Redmanes has the same situation. It deals physical and fire damage as well, so it's going to get buffed by both sides of that buff. And lastly, I have Lightning Armament here. This is in order to give yourself a different damage type. Some enemies are heavily resistant to fire damage, so putting Blood Flame Blade on there is disadvantageous to you. But putting something like Lightning on there will give you more damage, and maybe they're not resistant to damage, or maybe they're weak to damage. So this just gives you a secondary damage type, and it adds a good amount of damage even with low faith. It also lasts longer than Blood Flame Blade, so you don't need to rebuff as often. Besides these things, you're going to be using Flame of the Redmanes a lot. Not only does this ability stagger regular enemies in one cast and most tougher enemies in two casts, it has a crazy AoE like cone in front of you, so you can actually hit enemies from a pretty good distance away with it, staggering them before they even get close, or just outright killing them before they even get close to you. So this build has fantastic AoE, and you can spam this ability really, really fast. Just make sure you go in for critical strikes on regular enemies in order to get that FP back, otherwise you're going to run out of FP very quickly with this build. So the stats I have for this build are 35 Vigor, 30 Mind, 15 Endurance, 50 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 9 Intelligence, 15 Faith, and 10 Arcane. The Vigor is there to make sure that you stay alive. Obviously, you're playing a melee build, even though you do have some casting range with Flame of the Redmanes. You're going to be in melee range predominantly, so you want to be able to take a hit or two and not die. 30 FP is there so that you can spam Flame of the Redmanes constantly and not run out of FP. We do have ways to regain that with Assassin's Cerulean Dagger, but that'll probably be swapped out later in the game for something that gives more damage. So you're going to want to have FP in order to make it from point A to point B without running out of flasks. 15 Endurance is there for a little extra stamina and equip load. You don't really need much with this build, but it's there for that regardless. 50 Strength is there because this not only boosts the damage of your weapon, but also of Flame of the Redmanes, so it's a good synergy there, and you're going to deal fantastic damage with this setup by having high strength. 15 Dexterity is there to meet the requirement of the weapon. You don't need any more than that, because when you put it on the heavy affinity, it won't have any dexterity scaling. 9 Intelligence is not necessary for this build. That's just happened to be what my class is, so you don't need any intelligence. And 15 Faith is there to meet the requirements for Lightning Armament and Flame Grant Me Strength. So you don't want any less than that, or you won't be able to use either of these buffs. Probably moving forward with this build, you'll probably increase your Faith up to 25 in order to get access to Golden Vow, and also to make Lightning Armament a little bit stronger. You need 10 Arcane for this build for Blood Flame Blade, but you don't need any more than that. So the main thing you want to know about this build is that you're going for stance breaks. When you're doing boss fights, prioritize using your L2 ability until you can down a boss, and then go ham with your R1 attacks, trying to set that hemorrhage status effect while dealing as much damage to it as it can. And then when it gets up, you're going to spam L2 again in order to knock it back down and sort of repeat this process until it dies. This should be something you're familiar with, like if you watched the Moonveil video, it's a similar concept. You're going for the stance breaks so that you can deal incredible damage to bosses while they're down, and for regular enemies, you stance break them, and then you just attack them with critical strikes in order to gain FP back. The thing about this build that sets it apart from Moonveil, in my opinion, is that it's cheaper to use the ability. It has longer range, it has AoE, and it's about the same speed. So you can actually, use it, I think, more effectively than Moonveil in most cases. So if you like the Moonveil playstyle, but you don't want to play Moonveil anymore, you might want to check out this build. And lastly, one last tip, before you go into boss fights, you're going to want to use your Flask of Wondrous Physique, and you're going to want to use the Fire Shrouding tier here in order to increase your fire damage for a little while. And also the Stone Barb Crack tier in order to increase your stagger damage, because you want to stagger damage, you want to stagger bosses as quickly as you can, and this will allow you to stagger them in like sometimes 2 casts of Flame of the Redmanes, and that allows you to just really, really mess them up fast. Stay tuned for more Elden Ring builds. I have a couple more builds left in the 100 range. I'm going to try and wrap them up this week, and then next week we should be moving into 150. If you have builds you would like to see, please let me know in the comments below.